Alright, time for the solutions for the set and interval notations worksheet. So this one's a little bit different. It's not like a lot of work to put in. And so I'm just going to show you what answers I got and just explain where I got them from. So on this first one, getting x less than 3. Well, if you look at your graph here, the important number there is one with the circle, that's at 3. And it's shaded to the left. And so x represents all the numbers that are less than 3, and so the shading here, since it goes left, is going to be less than. And this circle is not filled in because it says less than but not equal to. That part's not there. But on the next one, the circle is filled in, and so that's why it's going to have the equal to part right there. And it's got the circle at the 0 part, so that's why 0 is on the right side of my inequality. And we're shaded to the right, so the number is bigger than 0, the ones we're interested in, so that's why x is greater than 0. When you get to 3, you need to do x is greater than -6. So draw your number line. You should make sure you have -6 on there. Put a circle at -6, and you're not going to fill it in because that just says greater than but not equal to. And then you're shading to the right because it says greater. X needs to be greater. And when you get to 4, this one says that x is less than or equal to 9. So draw your number line and put a circle at 9. And make sure you fill it in because it says less than or equal to. And since it says less than, we need to shade to the left. So that's why this one's shaded to the left. And if you go to that right column there, the interval notation column, you're just going to be basically describing where the shading is on the graph. On this first one, the shading starts at clear at the -infinity, or it goes left forever. So it's going to start at -infinity, and it goes all the way up to 3. And notice how both of these are these circular brackets. That's because 3 is not included. And whenever you have an infinity or -infinity, it's always a circular bracket. The next one, our shading starts at 0 and continues on to the right forever and ever, all the way to infinity. And on 0, our circle is filled in, and so that's why it's going to be a square bracket there. On the next one, our shading goes from -6 to infinity, so the shading starts, so always slide from left to right. And imagine you're sliding from left to right, and where's the shading? Starts at -6, and it goes on forever and ever as you go right. And so that's why it's from -6 to infinity. That -6 part is not filled in, and so it's going to be a circular bracket there. And on the next one, our shading starts at clear at -infinity as we move left to right, and then it stops at 9. And at 9, the circle is filled in, and so that's why it's going to be a square bracket. Alright, moving on to the next sections of 5 through 9 there, the bottom half of the front page. In order to get any of the stuff on number 5, you need to come over to the interval, which has -6. Comma infinity, so the shading starts at -6, and it's going to keep going until you reach infinity. So it starts at -6. It's going to be closed, a closed circle because we have a closed bracket, so filled in circle, and goes right forever. And once you have the graph here, it's pretty quick to see the x is greater than or equal to -6 because it starts at -6. It's equal to because it's filled in, and shaded to the right because it's greater than. When we get to the next part, number 6, it starts at 1, so 1's going to be the right side of our inequality here, and we're interested in the numbers to the left, so that's why it's going to be less than, and our circle is filled in, so that's why it's equal to there on that part. And when you get to 7, here, this says that x is between -2 and 7 and +7. So you're going to go to -2 and 7, put your circles there in your number line, and you're going to shade in between. And the right one doesn't have an equal to, so it's going to be open. The left one has an equal to, so that's why that one's filled in there on the left side. We'll just finish up this front part. On 8, in order to get any of that, you have to look at the interval. The interval says negative, so -3 comma infinity, and it's open brackets or circular brackets on both ends. And so that's why we're going to have an open circle at -3, and it's shading to the right, because the shading goes all the way to positive infinity. And that means that x starts at -3, and it's going to be greater, because it's shading to the right towards positive infinity. That's listed there. And once you get down to 9, we have two intervals going on. The left one, it starts at -5 and it's shading to the left, so we're looking at -5 and x needs to be less than. And it's going to be just less than, but not equal to, because it's an open circle. And the other shading starts at 9 and goes to the right, so the number is bigger than 9, and then x is going to be greater than. And this one, it's not going to be equal to, because that is not filled in. And if you switch over to the right side here, our first interval that you had to fill in, -infinity, 1 with the square bracket, because the shading starts clear over at -infinity, and as it goes right, it's going to keep going until it reaches 1 and stops, and it includes 1, so we're going to have the square bracket there. The second one, square bracket at -2, circular bracket at 7, square bracket at -2 because we have a closed circle at -2, and it's a circular bracket at 7 because that circle on the right side is not filled in. And then at the bottom, we have two different intervals, and so you have to write both of them separately and then put this little U in the middle. The first one comes from the left section of our graph, starts clear over at -infinity as you travel from left to right, and then it stops at -5. So that's why it's -infinity to 5. It's a circular bracket because -5 has an open circle, and that's why on the other interval that's going to have an open bracket or circular bracket at 9. So that's why it's a parenthesis there. And the shading goes all the way to the right towards infinity, as you can see there. So there's your front half of your assignment. Moving on to the back half. On this one, our shading goes from -5 to 8. That's why x is between -5 and 8. And the left one is filled in, and that's why it's got this equal to part right there. Once we move down to 11, this one says x is between -12 and 2. And so if you graph what you have, if you put your things on a number line, you're going to put a circle at -12 and at 2 and fill in between. And these circles are filled in because both of those say or equal to. So that's why these are going to be filled in here. To get anything that's on 12, you have to look at your interval. The shading starts for this left one at -infinity and goes to the right until it reaches -12. So that's why this left portion is right there. It goes all the way to -12. It includes -12 because it's got a square bracket. The second interval is going to include 0 because it's got a square bracket and go all the way to infinity. So it starts at 0, goes all the way to infinity, and it's filled in because it's a square bracket. And once you have this, it's pretty quick to see that we have an OR statement where x is less than or equal to -12, or x is greater than or equal to 0. So left of -12 to the right of 0. And then on 13, we have x less than or equal to -7. So you have a closed circle at -7 shaded to the left, just like that's there. Or we have x greater than or equal to 1. So I have a closed circle at 1 because it's or equal to. And shaded to the right because it says greater than. Let's do this last part. We have the shading between two different numbers, -14 and 4. And so x is going to have to be greater than -14 and less than -4. Notice the and part. It must do both, so it's going to be in between. And both of these are open circles because both of the inequalities are just greater than or less than, but not equal to. And if you move to the right side, our shading goes from -5 to 8, and it includes -5. Notice the closed circle there, and that's why it's going to have a square bracket. On the next one, we have closed circles of both -12 and 2, and that's why our shading is going to go from -12 to 2, and it's filled in between, so make sure your interval just includes what's shaded. Once you get down to this part, Shading starts at negative infinity and goes all the way to negative 7, and it includes negative 7. So all the way from negative infinity includes negative 7, closed circle. And it picks up again at 1 and goes all the way to infinity, moving from left to right. Starts at 1 and goes to infinity. Okay. And then our last one, shading goes between, starts up at negative 14, stops at negative 4. You can see that here in the picture. And we have open circles, and that's why we have open brackets on both the ends of our interval there. And that brings us to the bottom. So these last ones, hopefully these are becoming very clear with these ones. Whenever you have a graph, look for where the shading starts. This one goes left for everyone the shading. So the shading is going to start negative infinity and goes all the way up to negative 6. So my x, one of the shading areas means x less than negative 6, but not equal to, because that's an open circle. And the other one doesn't have an equal to because it's an open circle as well, but it starts at 10 and continues on forever, all the numbers bigger than 10. So that's why my other one's going to be x greater than 10. Notice it's going to be or. Anytime you have the shading going outward, it's going to be an or statement because you want one of the two things to happen. On 16, notice how x is between a 1 and a 4. So when you're graphing it, put a circle at 1 and at 4, and then only fill it in if it says or equal to, which is the case in the right part. So we're going to fill in 4. And you need a shade in between those two numbers. In order to get 17, you come over here and look at your interval. The shading starts, what it says here, starts at negative infinity and goes all the way to 7, but doesn't include 7. Notice the circular bracket. And so when I come over here, I'm going to start shading from the left side. It goes to 7, and it's going to have an open circle because it's an open bracket. My right one, on the other hand, starts at 10, and then the shading continues all the way on forever to the right, towards positive infinity, and 10 has an open bracket, so we're going to have an open circle at 10. Starts at 10, goes to the right. And once you know that, it's pretty quick to see that x is less than 7, because it starts at 7, goes left. Or x starts at 10 and goes to the right, so it's going to be x greater than 10. So those are a couple options. On 18, again, our shading, if you look at it, it goes from negative 1 and left. So that's why we're going to have x is less than negative 1. And that circle is filled in, so that's why it's got the equal to part there. The other shading starts at 3, and it's filled in, and goes to the right. So that'd be numbers bigger than or equal to 3. So x is greater than or equal to 3. To get anything on 19, you look at your interval. The shading starts at negative 9, stops at 3, and it includes both of those numbers because they have the square brackets on the ends there. So from negative 9 to 3, filled in circles, and then shading in between. And once you have that, you realize there's a couple of inequalities that need to happen. You need to have greater than or equal to negative 9, our left end, and you're going to have x less than or equal to 3 because that's where the shading stops. And it's equal to because they're both filled in circles. And then on 20, x, if you look at your graph here, it goes from 3 to 7, so it's there in the middle. X is between 3 and 7, and both of these circles are open, and so that's why there's not going to be that equal to part on the bottom, just the less than symbols there. And moving over to the far right column, our shading for our graph here starts clear at negative infinity and goes all the way until you reach negative 6, hence negative infinity to negative 6. It's going to be a circular bracket because that's open circle, and once you get to 10, it picks up again and goes to the right forever to infinity. So that's why it's going to be 10 infinity, and it's not filled in, so we're going to have a circular bracket there, and it's got two pieces, so you have the U portion there. Whereas on our next graph, which starts at 1 and goes all the way to 4 and stops, our interval is going to go from 1 to 4. And 4 was a filled in circle. That's a filled in circle, so we're going to have a square bracket on the end there. Getting down to this part, our shading on the left side starts at negative infinity and goes all the way to negative 1. It includes negative 1, so that's why it's going to be a square bracket, negative 1. And our right interval, the one over here, starts up at 3 and includes 3 and goes right forever to infinity. So 3 gets included with a square bracket and goes all the way to positive infinity. And then our bottom one, our shading goes between 3 and 7, because if you look at it, it starts at 3, stops at 7, and it's open circle for both end. So we're going to have open bracket or circular bracket on the ends there. And that brings us to the bottom. Really, you can choose whatever you want for your notation you prefer. I'm going to put interval. And then why would we need to designate whether it's real or integer numbers? That'd come about because some real life situations need integers, need only integers. Like if you're trying to get how many people are at a dance, you're not going to count like a half person with only like one bit there, okay? People are whole people or no peoples. So you're not going to, there's situations that you want just whole numbers. And there you go, solutions.